Thanks. Where that? Oh. Good evening, everyone. I wish to call to order the Park Board meeting of November 19th, 2012. Before I begin, though, I want to welcome John back.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We've been missing you.
Thank you.
So the first item on the agenda is roll call. Janet?
Member Dan Peterson? Here. Member Halbert? Here. Member Sella? Here. Member Deeds?
Here.
Member Jones?
Here.
Member Giesecke?
Here.
Member Catherine Peterson?
Here.
Member Jacobson?
Here.
Member Segreto?
Here.
Okay.
Okay, next thing on the agenda is approval of our agenda. Can I have a motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Okay, next on the agenda is the adoption of the consent agenda. Do I have a motion for approval? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so moved. Okay, so next is community comment. During the community comment, the Park Board would invite residents to share relevant issues or concerns. Individuals must limit their comments to 3 minutes. Do I have any comment? Okay. We'll move on to first report and recommendation will be the Edina Nordic Ski snowmaking proposal. And I believe the coach of the high school team, the coaches of the high school team will come and present.
Introduce yourself while I,
Okay.
your name, your address.
I'm Andy Turnbull, 5437 Halifax Lane, and I am the head coach of the Edina Nordic Cross Country Ski Team.
I'm Paul Gage, 5813 Amy Drive, and I'm an assistant coach.
To advance either hit this or button here. And if you're going to speak.
All right, here. I think I'm going to be quiet.
In the fall of 1996, I was hired as a third coach for the Edina Cross Country Ski Team as the team went from 40 skiers to 60 skiers. And I signed my contract, put on my ski boots, and walked down to the athletic field and began to ski. And I thought, how hard can this be? We'll just be able to ski almost every day. Fast forward to 2011, the Edina Nordic Ski Team had grown to 142 skiers, and we skied for a grand total of 2.5 days on our athletic fields because, as you will recall, last year it was a somewhat snowless winter. A year later, after a snowless winter, the cross-country ski team is 162 skiers. And so we've decided that we would like to attempt to fool Mother Nature and make a little snow on our athletic fields. The challenge that we have is the varsity skiers who have been on the team for a number of years will find a way to get on snow, whether it's driving to Highland Hills in the morning, whether it's going to one of the other venues that make snow, which require some driving, are not particularly convenient, are usually not available to us at the times we practice. They'll find a way of getting on snow. It's all of those new skiers that we can't teach to ski because we have no snow to ski on. So our proposition is to do a pilot program this year on the trails which we have cut on the Creek Valley athletic fields and on Park Board land at Creek Valley. And Paul, if you want to start to roll this forward. We've got a number of kids that want to ski. As I said, we're up to 162 skiers this year. It's great aerobic conditioning for the skiers. It's just an excellent way of getting kids out and getting them off the couch. So we feel, and I almost wore my sweatshirt that said Edina Nordic, the race against global warming. We feel that snowmaking is in fact the future for us. As I say, this year we want to make snow in that loop around the Gleason Water Tower. So we're asking permission from the city for 2 things primarily. For the use of a city compressor, running both water and compressed air through a nozzle in cold temperatures is the way you make snow. So we need that air compressor, and then for the use of city water to make the snow. We'll handle all of the hard goods other than the compressor. We'll handle moving the snow around. We'll groom the trails on a daily basis once we get them down. So just go forward again. The requirements to make snow, it's pretty water intensive. It can take up to 1 million gallons. We also need, as I said, a compressor. We're using a relatively portable snow gun that we can move around, put the snow exactly where we want it. We've obtained the use of a snow moving machine that will move snow where we can't get it to by just moving the gun. We've got the hose coming, so all of basically the infrastructure is in place. Hit the next slide. This is a picture of Elm Creek from last year, and if you look, you'll see a very nice figure 8 of snow and nothing anywhere else. So this is Elm Creek up in Osseo. It's one of the places that Three Rivers makes snow for cross-country skiing. There is basically no place in the South Metro right now. We'll be using the trails basically from 3:15 to 5 o'clock to 5:30 on a daily basis. The rest of the time, it's open to the public. And I looked at the results from the American Birkebeiner race. There are about 150 Edina residents who skied that race last year. Here's the venue that we're looking to make snow on, and you can kind of see the area at the top, outlined in white, is park board land. The area to the south of that near the elementary school, the soccer fields there, is on school board land. But we would propose to use the area from the base of the soccer fields up to the water tower and back down again. This is just a close-up of that field. And the sledding hill right now is open for negotiation. It's not something that we need to do, and we think probably we will not do it this first year in a pilot project. If this proves successful, we may look at it in future years.
The red lines were the stretch of the hoses, I believe.
Yep, I think the red line is the area that we can reach with the hoses for the snowmaking gun that we have now. To push snow around other places, we would use some sort of moving equipment. And this is just an extended loop if we can move snow even farther. If in fact we have a completely snowless winter, this is something that we could conceivably do. There's about a kilometer and a half of skiing there that we could do. The other option would be to make the snow entirely on the athletic fields underneath Edina High School. There is some noise associated with snowmaking. We need cold temperatures to do it, but we feel that the loop making snow kind of between the crosstown and the north edge of Creek Valley Elementary would be the most impervious to noise migration, if you will. So what we're asking for from the city is some water, the use of a compressor, and one of the stories that I have used at innumerable ski banquets is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Art Downey, the only boys swimming coach that the city of Edina has ever had. I think he refers to himself as being in the 6th year of his second 50 years as a coach. And several years ago at my end of the season conference, I said, you know, I'm not sure Art would have made it this long if he had to wait for it to rain to fill his swimming pool. So we're asking for a little help from the city here to make it snow to fill our cross-country ski course. So, end of my presentation. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try to field them.
Thank you, Andy. Question. The up to 1 million gallons, is that per snowmaking session or for the whole season?
That would hopefully be for the whole season.
And Just a dumb question, what does a typical household use?
Well, a typical soccer field uses about 1.5 million gallons a summer. So, and I'm afraid golf courses use well over 1 million gallons a hole.
Wow.
So this is, and, like water on a golf course, this is all going back into the environment.
Yeah. Thank you.
I really like the idea. My question was, if this were successful this winter, would it be at all possible to try to raise money to buy a compressor for use in following years?
It's
Like have a race
certainly
and
conceivable
fundraiser?
that would be, or, to look at some other option.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah, leasing would be probably our next most likely option, is we would look into leasing it. These compressors are used to blow out people's sprinkling systems, and then they collect dust until next year. So I would think we would look more towards leasing, but we would do that.
Okay.
So is my understanding from your presentation that the loop that you're proposing to make this year is entirely on parkland rather than school land?
There might be one small edge of it that drops onto school land, but probably 90% of it is on parkland.
And I see in your written proposals that you have tentative agreement from the Creek Valley administration. Are we any further with that, or can you give me any more?
That, I don't have an answer for that. To the best of my knowledge, we've been given tentative approval there. I have not heard anything to the contrary.
Thank you.
Good proposal. I don't have any questions.
I just want to add, I think the Park Board should view this as a partnership rather than just a request from the Nordic ski team. We see this from a staff standpoint as very beneficial to the general public. It'd be really wonderful, we think, to have a cross-country groomed trail with snow that we could count on through the winter. I think there's a great benefit, and I really appreciate you coming forward with that. That was and the only other comment, and it's written in my staff report, as staff, we do have question about using water to make snow for a sliding hill, and primarily more for liability purposes when the city sticks its neck out to provide the free water, the use of compressor, how much liability exposure would the city have? It's just a question, not that it's completely undoable, but just for the pilot project, let's see how you do with the ski trail first, and then maybe we'll look at a sliding hill next.
We'd be happy to not take on extra work.
So, okay, thank you.
I like the idea, gentlemen. I think I like the presentation. Did you say the course was going to be 1.5 kilometers? Is that
approximately 1
Okay.
There's some variation in there in terms of what we can cover, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm envisioning, because I too would think it's a nice, it's beneficial to the community as well as to the school and to the team. So I'm behind it. I'm thinking, it's a pilot project. Maybe a year from now we take a look at how successful it was. I know you have a storehouse of used equipment, and I think it's probably not of top quality, but it's certainly there. I'm just thinking out loud that might be beneficial to help the community make it participate more, is maybe to offer some kind of rental, something to get some younger kids started and things like that. And just an idea, but I know our family started late, and my son enjoys it. But I didn't have a background in it. But if we could get some kids out there younger, it might help the team later on as well.
Well, and there's certainly, community ed options here for giving lessons. If we have snow, it'd be a marvelous option.
Yeah. So,
One of the other things that I'm a member of is the Minnesota Youth Ski League, and I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but that's the mission of that organization. And in order to host a club, you need a place. It's geared for children ages 4 to basically when they start to ski for their high school or middle school. So in Edina, kids at 7th grade level, which are 13 years old or so. So younger than that, they're in Minnesota and Wisconsin, they tend to go into the MYSL. We just need a place to host it, and there is further to the west there is the ice skating rink, and so there is a warming hut there. I believe it's a little bit small because the organization that I started with, we had to cut off at about 80 skiers, and there's no way you can put 80 kids in there. But if you're interested in youth programming, the minute you have those two things, a trail and a place to keep them warm. Elm Creek started with a yurt, which is a glorified tent, and that's more than adequate. I mean, that's ideal. But youth programming would flock to this. So.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page, so I stand fully behind it. Thank you.
I have a question and a comment. Question has to do with the location, and have you given any thought to convenience for the students of possibly the high school being an easier location, especially for the younger students?
We have. We're certainly within walking distance, and it's a sport, so a little extra activity is not going to hurt them. The primary reason to look at the Creek Valley venue is it has some vertical. It has hills, and the hills at the high school are too steep to be skiable. And having had a few kids go down them, I wouldn't want to put that kind of liability on anybody. So we kind of felt that the Creek Valley, plus it has a little greater hydrant access than the high school athletic fields do. So.
Okay. The other comment that I had has to do probably more with the extended loop, because the starting point, I think you said the starting point was at the corner of the soccer field. And then with the extended loop, it actually infringes somewhat on the soccer field. So I would just be concerned that having this track go through there might damage the field, and so I think we might want to be careful about that to, make sure that that corner is off of the field, and that there isn't a loop that goes right over the field and could.
We're certainly
damage
cognizant of keeping the fields in good shape, and we have in the past, when we've had snow, groomed those fields with pretty good success. I mean, in the spring, there's no visible sign that we were ever there. So, but yes, that's a point well taken.
I think it sounds like a good idea. The only question I have is, how long would you anticipate it's going to take to make that much snow, and what time of day would you be making it?
We're hoping that this can be done in a week. The information we're getting from the manufacturer is that this should be doable within a week. It's temperature dependent, and obviously it gets colder at night than it does during the day. So, some of the work. If we blow from the area between Creek Valley and the crosstown, basically at the edge of the upper Creek Valley elementary school parking lot, where you're pretty isolated from any residential interference, we might try to do that evening hours to the extent that we comply with the noise ordinance. If we do blow on the edge of that field, there we might do it during the day. The noise from the gun is very directional, and you would be blowing snow towards the crosstown, so I don't see it being an issue. But yeah, we're very aware that we can't keep anybody up at night.
I really like the proposal. I do have a few questions. I'm familiar with the trail as it goes from 9 Mile Creek up towards the water tower.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a steep incline, but it is an incline. And during the non-snow season, I'm wondering about the stability of the trail so that we don't get a lot of erosion on that incline.
The trail that we've been using is in place. This is the third year for most of it now. And, I don't know that we've had any rains of the century during that time, but so far it's been very stable. We've tried to grade it so that the runoff is controlled. This spring we may try to get something onto parts of those trails, whether it's grass seed or some sort of wood chips, but at least to this point, it's been a pretty stable trail.
I'm just wondering, with more use, there'll be less underbrush there. I think there was some grass, but I'm starting to see a little wear because I do use that trail quite a bit. So, I don't know whose expense trail stabilization would be, but...
We've certainly done all of the work on it to this point, and yeah, that's something that... as I said, when we cut that trail, we tried to grade it so that erosion wouldn't be a concern. There's probably not much we can do to keep people off of it, but our intent this year is to come back and do some seeding on it. And in some of the areas that are heavily shaded, there's an area right along across town where there's some heavy pine tree cover. That may take wood chips or something like that to cover that portion of the trail, because I'm not sure we could get grass to go.
And are you tracking for both classic skiing and ski skating? Okay. The other question I have is more of a park policy question. During drought years, what is our water policy issue for non-essential watering? I guess this is a broader question than just the ski trail.
Yeah, that's actually a question we asked of our city engineer, and the demand for water is significantly lower in the winter. So he just said not an issue, just because of the time of year. If it was during the summer, it would be a very big issue.
And the other issue is, I recall at a prior meeting we passed a resolution allowing your snowmobile to track on parkland. Do you need approval to use the snowmobile on the Creek Valley property?
No, we have the blessing of the school administration to use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And school administration is very behind us on this pilot project. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wants to, first, any other questions? Okay. Does anyone in the audience want to speak to this proposal? Okay. Well then, why don't we go through and have a discussion. If you all want to, if you have any other points that you want to make?
I suggest we move to approve.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve, and
with the exception of the sledding hill.
With the exception of the sledding hill. So the motion is to accept the proposal as written with the exception of the sledding hill, and there's been a second. So is there any discussion?
Just add one quick thing. I noticed on one of the slides it said also requesting the permit for noise ordinance. And that's something the Park Board doesn't grant. Just so you know, that's not part of the motion. That will be something the health department's responsible for, and they have to keep the decibel levels within acceptable levels, and they vary from day to night. So that's something that will be tested, and hopefully this won't all be for naught because the stuff is too noisy. But that we really won't know until they're out there literally making the snow. So just so you know, that's not part of your motion.
Okay.
Are there any insurance issues that we need to be concerned about?
No, I think whatever insurance issues there are, I believe we're well covered through our general liability.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on, next on the agenda is the 2013-2017 Parks and Recreation Department Capital Improvement Plan. It was hoping John would introduce
Yeah.
that.
It's my understanding you've been through the enterprise facility CIP exercise at your last meeting, so you've had a pretty good idea of the different approach that's now being taken, a different process that's being used to determine what the CIP is. One of the things that's fundamentally different is it is a 2-year budgeted process and a following 3-year planning process. Now, it used to be a 1-year budgeted process, but whatever it is that the council approves, based on your recommendations, will be considered budgeted for those 2 years. So that is significantly different. The other thing that is significantly different from previous years, each one of these capital improvement items is now competing against all of the other departments. And understandably so, because we're continually getting to the point where we're running out of construction fund money. And we're trying to find, is there a way to prioritize things so at least we can stretch the dollars the best we can. Well, unfortunately, I think Park and Rec ended up on the short end of the stick on that. That's pretty obvious of all the planning we went through with the Pamela Park master plan, as you recall, and all the fields and the parking lots. That has literally been pushed back to some future years where hopefully funding will become available. So that was one of the fallouts from that change. I think the good news is we are getting still the lion's share of the money available for the parks. Some of it got funneled to the enterprise facilities a little stronger to help out the struggling golf course. But I think that'll self-correct in time. I think in the short term, we're going to be hurting a little on the general parks, but I think in the future, when they find adequate funding, we'll be able to make up. We'll play a catch-up game. Now, after all that editorial, I think what's in front of you is requesting your review and comment on things that you see you would like maybe changed, questioned, whatever. So with that, I would open it up to your comments and questions.
Okay. Do you want to just take it, or do you want to go down the row? Dan, do you want to? Okay. Okay.
We're going down the row? Go ahead. Okay. So, John, I'd like to try and understand, we've been through this. We know we are short on playing fields. We know we lack space for the demand that we have with the younger generation trying to play, growing, all of the sports and growing. So can you walk me through why is it that particularly all of the athletic facilities were 5 or below? What was the, as you went through the process, or what was the feedback in terms of this? And what are the 1, 2, and 3 priorities that are getting funded in contrast?
Well, I think that's a great question. Being absent for the last 2 months, this was a shock to me. So I don't know that I'm prepared to answer what happened exactly. I agree with you. I was a little more than disappointed to see that, what I think is some of the higher priorities, which is our athletic fields, have gotten held off. How it ended up where it is, it's really a culmination, I think, of some of the point values that were given, and being that we're now competing with more than just ourselves. We're competing with police, fire, engineering, public works, all that. And it fell as you see it. That's the best explanation I can give you.
And is there any appeal process at this point? Is there, great, they put a number down. Is this written in stone for a 2-year cycle? Is this done? Or is there an appeal process at this point? Because it seems, I'm curious. I would love to try and understand what the priorities are. Is this something we can bring the city manager in to have a discussion about?
Well, I think they're going to be very interested to hear the Park Board's comments. I can't answer whether there's an appeal. I know this. I believe is scheduled to be on the council's December agenda, the 18th. And they're going to be paying close attention to your review and comment. I think it is their intention to act on a CIP if there's really strong feelings from the park board that this is not acceptable, whatever input you want to give, they can decide to delay the process and maybe have a joint meeting. I don't know. That's for the council to decide. That's why this is an important meeting for the park board to provide your comments.
I think clearly there's some needs in the park system that maybe can't be addressed just simply in a CIP. That having gone through the Sports Zone process, there are some short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term issues that need to be addressed. And it might be an opportunity in the upcoming year to have a work session with the City Council and talk about maybe some goals to try to address some of those needs in the park system. Just a thought.
And can you explain what's the NA on these priorities? Are those going to be funded, or are they?
It's the equipment, parks equipment.
It's parts equipment replacement, and it's park planning and design?
I'm trying to think how these priority numbers were part of the prioritization process. And I think for all equipment replacement, that was not part of the prioritization. It was a given. You can't not do those. It was just, this is a creative way to finance equipment replacement that used to fall within the operating budget. So that's why that's NA. The rest of these, I believe, were given a prioritized number based on the executive leadership team who were involved in assigning priority numbers to it on this rather laborious process that I know Ann had to work through. And those are the numbers that were assigned. And I think a 1 would be a high priority, and 8 or a 7 would be much lower, if I'm reading that right. Again, I didn't have the luxury of walking through that process, but I tried to get up to speed since I've been back. I think that's how it went up.
Okay.
Ann, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I would add a couple of things. First of all, the items that are on priorities 1 through 5 are likely to be funded in the first 2 years, and items that are ranked a 6 or a 7 are not likely to be funded in the first 2 years. The other comment that I would like to make regarding an appeals process, while John was out, I did have an opportunity to make an appeal to our city manager. And the direction that we were given is that if we have, I'll use an example of a project of $250,000 that we would like to put back into the process, then we needed to come up with $250,000 that we would cut out, because we only have a limited amount of resources available. And I did make an effort to specifically get the Pamela Fields back in the process, and did come up with some fairly significant cuts, primarily from the enterprise operations. And it was decided to keep the proposal as is for the time being, again looking for the input from the park board to the city council.
So to clarify, you said that those that were priority 5 were likely to be funded, but the commentary from staff indicates that the only thing that actually was funded was the Wooddale Park playground equipment. Is that correct?
From 2013.
For 2013. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the Garden Park baseball field, which was another partnership project, appears to have fallen by the wayside. And as I recall from the discussion we had at the last meeting, there were questions about that priority of the Wooddale Park equipment, given that the equipment at Wooddale Park does not need replacing at this time, and there probably are greater needs, both in terms of playground equipment and possibly using those funds for another project.
The Garden Park baseball field is in fact scheduled and budgeted to be done in the year 2013. You'll see the $300,000 figure, and if you look at the bottom, it is relying on $200,000 minimum from grants and donations.
Right,
Now,
but-
here's the bad news. We have been informed that we did not receive the grant. They did not accept it. Now, having said that, baseball has already come forward and said, well, how about if we continue to use the city's $100,000? We'll donate $100,000. Let's see how much we can get done in 2013 for $200,000. So that's something that'll be on the table. But it is budgeted for 2013. But you're right about Wooddale, playground equipment replacement. That is the only thing other than the equipment replacement for the Parks Department. It's the only thing currently on the 2014 plan. And that's relying on a $100,000 donation from the neighborhood.
And I want to speak to that a little bit as well. Last year, we looked at the replacement of our playgrounds in Edina. There's currently 23 playgrounds in Edina, and most playground manufacturers say that they have a lifespan between 15 and 20 years. The oldest playground in Edina is 17 years old. It was installed in 1995 at Lewis Park. And Wooddale Playground was installed 5 years later. There are 12 playgrounds at least 5 years older than the Wooddale Park. So I'm having a hard time with a tight budget rationalizing $100,000 to have one park skip over all these other neighborhood parks. If a person from any of those other neighborhoods came to me and said, well, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? I would have a hard time rationalizing it. So I do want to ask staff, what's your plan both for keeping our parks? To me it seems as if we, in our budget, in our capital improvement budget, we need to be replacing at least one playground every year to maximize both staff and the planning process and the actual installation process with our staff. I'm just wondering what the plan will be, because even in the 5-year plan, we don't have that.
That's a really good comment. I think the reason why you see the Wooddale play equipment on the 2014 budget is because a resident came forward and has offered to raise $100,000. I mean, to call it like it is. That's, I think, what got it on the page. Now, you're right. I think we do need to put player equipment once a year to be sure we catch up. Because if you remember, we had a successful referendum in '96, and we replaced a lot of them all at one time. And it's going to be difficult to do that all in 1 year, to do the same thing. So that should be put on a schedule and get to them one at a time. But you're right, Wooddale was not on the schedule to be done even within this 5-year plan, because there was like a dozen of them ahead of it.
At what level does a bonding issue need to go to referendum?
Pardon me?
At what level does a bonding issue need to go to referendum?
The referendum back in '96?
No, presently.
Well, we had 2 referendums on the ballot. We had a $5.5 million one that really helped us replace quite a few of the playgrounds, and I forget the number of them. And then there was another $2.5 million for that South Arena that also passed.
I think, John, what he's getting at, is there a ceiling where you can have a bond issue? There's a ceiling where it has to go to referendum to vote of the citizens?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't. That's up to the city council. There's no magic number. I think when the council gets to a point where the needs are so great and the funding is not available and they don't think they can raise a levy politically, they will go to the voters. Now, it would, as I stated in my staff report, I think it would be wise of the council to find a more sustainable fund to catch up on the needs that you folks have astutely brought forward. The playground equipment, all of the field issues, and to find a sustainable source of funding so you don't have to go to the voters to do maintenance. That's easy for me to sit here and say that. It's a very difficult thing for politicians to do, to raise your taxes.
There are certain things that when we looked at, like a few years ago, putting in turf at Pamela Park, and the life expectancy of those fields being, let's say, 12 years, we compared the cost of maintaining a grass field versus a turf field. So the annual maintenance expenses of those fields, when you compare the upfront on a turf versus the annual on a grass field, it's not like we're adding something to the system that requires ongoing maintenance. That's what I was wondering on a bonding issue, if we clearly have a need for more multi-use athletic fields. What would the appetite be, with city council to do something like that? And if we have the debt at Fred Richards retiring in this upcoming year, that's where I'm thinking maybe it might be worthwhile to have a work session or a discussion with the council to see what their appetite is for doing something like that in the upcoming year.
Yeah, the city council has already brought up that word bond issue already. They are thinking in that direction, I know. And maybe there'd be a great discussion in a work session for Park Board to have with council. And you're right, the golf course bonded indebtedness goes off the books in January of next year. So you just got a couple more months of payments. Now, and then all they have left, I shouldn't say all they have left, they have over $1 million in cash deficit that the city would like to have paid back. It's going to take time. But you can see they are still willing to make some investments back in the golf course. But maybe referendum is the direction you go. I don't know how else you're going to catch up.
A comment and a question. The comment is, I happened to look this morning at interest rates. 30-year Treasury is 2.75. A 30-year AAA tax-free at the national level is 3.1. Those are the lowest rates, I believe the article said, in 80 years since the Depression. And it sure makes sense not to wait 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, where a 30-year AAA tax-free would be 3 3/4, 4. It's an incredible time to think about the future because you can finance it cheap. A 30-year mortgage is 3.3 today. In 1981, it was 18%. My question is, where on here, I looked through it twice, I did not see the Braemar golf course driving range and redo of the executive course.
You folks saw that last month.
Right. But it's not on, should it have been on this? And
No.
Okay.
No, this was just what's in front of you to get review and comment because you already did that part.
Thank you.
Last month. Mm-hmm.
And perhaps I should know this, but could you refresh my recollection? Obviously, all the park and rec projects right here have priority rankings of somewhere between 5, 6, or 7. Are those the rankings that the park administration chose with? I understand you would have put them all 1s, 2s, and 3s. Yes,
Yeah.
we all would have. But then with the ordering within the projects that are here, did you have the ability to move some up to 5s and some down to 7s within the ones that they're saying, well, we're not going to fund them immediately anyway, but at least reordering those priorities, or are those priorities outside of our hands as well?
Yeah, well, once it gotten in, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but once it had gone through this new process, no, park staff had no say as to the point value that it got.
Yes, that is correct. We had the ability going in to rank the projects in order. We had approximately 80 projects total for our department, and we ranked them 1 to 80.
So do these correlate with that ranking, or are they not terribly correlated?
That's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because, as John mentioned earlier, I think that you'll see the capital improvement funding for the enterprise facilities to be very generous. So in terms of the enterprise operations, I think that we did very well. In terms of some of our general parks projects, we might not have done quite as well.
What I tried to point out, you'll notice that also in your packet, you have 3 attachments. And attachment B is actually what staff was recommending to administration at the start of this process. And it's just slightly different from what the Park Board had supported a year ago of the path that we were on, which is attachment C. And really the only thing that's really major different there is we decided it makes more sense to build the new field at Pamela before we renovate the senior field. Then we don't have a loss of a field for a season. Otherwise, everything else pretty much stayed the same, and you can see how we got from B to A under this new plan.
I have a question with respect to the half-size basketball court for Highlands Park.
Okay.
I'm wondering where that came from.
That is not a new, it was a how do I say that? I've had that request from residents in the neighborhood for several years, but never in a formal petition matter. Another resident came forward and says, well, I'd be willing to get a petition if that's what it takes. And I said, well, we're a little late for that, but I'll put it on the CIP and see where it goes. It's not a lot of money, and it didn't make the list.
I'm responding to that as I did with the playground equipment, that I see how a successful, my vision for neighborhood parks is to create community. So, and maybe this neighborhood wants a basketball court, but maybe they don't. And I don't know that. And I know that there are processes in order that we've done. The Park Board has done when we remodeled Chowan Park. We invited the neighborhood to get together and tell us what playground equipment they wanted and what they wanted their park to look like. And I would suggest that I would be much more comfortable approving this after that process than before that process, by having one person come forward to us and say, this was the neighborhood, at our neighborhood meeting, didn't even mention this. So the neighborhood doesn't know about this.
Oh, okay.
And they may want it. Some people may want it. Some people may not. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking that in order for us to move ahead with something, we should vet that.
And let me speak to that. I think this falls in the same category as the Lake Edina pathway that you see is now all of a sudden on our agenda. There has not been a public process for that yet either. And if it survived the funding process, my intention was to do a public process. Do you really want this at this point? Now, maybe there's some argument to be made we should spend the money and time and go through, does the neighborhood want this, and should we put this in a proposed CIP? Lake Edina, it will not necessarily happen, even if the funding gets approved, if it doesn't survive the public process. We haven't gone through that yet, and that is the intent. We've already spent some money on an engineer to go out and map out where the path's going to be, how much it's going to cost. And after that, we're going to have a public process, if it survives funding. So that I would think the basketball court would be much the same. And if the neighbors really end up not wanting it, you wouldn't go forward.
And my point is mostly, I think every neighborhood should have the ability to look at their park comprehensively and not just this, do we want a trail, but what do we want it to look like, just as we've done with other parks and had a design for it. And I think I feel kind of funny about saying I'm uncomfortable leaving that on there.
Sure.
Just as I'm uncomfortable leaving on the equipment for Wooddale, although I want to encourage neighborhoods to say, we'll do fundraising, just as Fox Meadow did fundraising. I want to encourage that type of cooperation with the park board in order to make their parks as beautiful as possible, but I'm uncomfortable with the way that we're handling it right now.
Okay.
Ellen, I'd like to comment for a second. I understand the idea of getting communities to raise money or fundraise, and we had the Hornet's Nest come in, and they're raising money. I am slowly concerned, though, with the priorities that we're setting, because that is a bias towards upper socioeconomic neighborhoods versus lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. You know, nice neighborhoods can tap on the neighborhood's door and find $100 per neighbor very, very quickly, and lower socioeconomic neighborhoods cannot. And so it's not just that they're fundraising to their park, but we're providing government matching, city matching dollars to what they're fundraising. So now we're saying, based on essentially your ability to raise funds in your neighborhood, which biases towards higher socioeconomic neighborhoods. I'm an economist, there's just no way around it. And the fact of the matter is, it's one thing to say, if you raise it all, we'll do it. It's one thing to say, we'll give you matching money, because then you're siphoning money to the upper income levels. And I'm sorry, in a parks type of orientation, I'm very concerned about that in the long run, and setting these kinds of precedents that we're doing right now. And I think we need to think pretty clearly about it, which is why I agree. I find the Wooddale Park as the only approved piece on here, essentially, troubling. And I understand the pragmatism of it. But this is a community, and the community should be taking care of all of its parks, and the priority should not be based upon the income level of the people surrounding those parks. And the priority we're setting is factoring that income level into it. We want to run the parks that way. Do we want to run the schools that way too? Okay, this is a priority that we have to think about, because we do have economic disparity. We have a fairly decent distribution and potentially an increasing distribution within this community. And we need to begin thinking through that, and the city council had better start thinking through that.
I agree.
I couldn't agree more. On that note, the other pieces, the shelter buildings that are on here, I want to also draw attention to the age of the other shelter buildings that these we're not mentioning. So Normandale and Arden Park are mentioned in the CIP. These buildings were built in '74, so that was 38 years ago, but Creek Valley Shelter Building was built in 1968, which is much older. It's 44 years old. Pamela Parks was built in 1970, 42 years old. So why are some of these parks, it seems as if we're jumping over some parks for shelter buildings, and actually, you know, maybe that's okay with, once again, it could be that maybe those communities don't want a shelter building just like the others. I just want to bring that discussion into it. It is getting warmer. Maybe they don't need that type of building. Maybe they'd rather have a gazebo in their park. I don't know.
We did bring the Pamela Shelter Building as part of the Pamela Park master plan process to the neighborhood, and hired ATS&R to give us even a variety of drawings to show to the neighborhood to get their input and how important that was to them. And that's when they told us they didn't like artificial turf on the field. So that's why that hasn't shown up again. But no, you make an excellent point, and those are things that need to be looked at as you begin to prioritize the replacement of the older infrastructure. I think you're right on.
Do we have anything approaching a master list of all warming houses and other buildings like that that details which are in the worst shape, which need the most maintenance, so that you can prioritize. It's one thing to just say, well, one was built 20 years before the other, but the older building might be in much better shape and need much less renovation, in which case you wouldn't be replacing that one before the younger building just because of the shape that they're in and the usage that they get. Do we have anything like a detailed list that shows us those parameters?
Yeah, there's unfortunately a very healthy and long list of future capital improvement plan projects, and the replacement of shelter buildings is one of them. The Arden, Countryside, Highlands, Normandale, and Strachauer were all built the same year. Higher on the priority list would be Creek Valley and Pamela and Lewis. I saw those as a higher priority. I put this list in front of the Park Board last year. So yeah, we've given that a lot of thought and put it on a 5-year plan for for the money we thought would be available. But I think at this point all bets are off. I mean, because the funding just isn't there. But yeah, there's a whole list of future capital things that maybe could be considered for a referendum or.
So that one other issue that I want to ask about a little bit is the Utley Park bathroom renovation, and I didn't know there were bathrooms at Utley Park.
Yes, there are bathrooms there, and that's one of the oldest buildings in the system. I'm not sure what year it was, and it's not even handicap accessible. So it is way past due to clean that up. And hopefully they'll raise enough money to get the Veterans Memorial built, and we'll be even in greater need for bathrooms if you're going to have ceremonies and whatnot down there. Otherwise, you're going to have to put handicap accessible toilets.
So when are the bathrooms open?
24/7.
And they're currently open?
All the time. Yeah, they even have a step up to get into the restroom, which is not a good scenario. And once they get in, a wheelchair could never move around. And in all honesty, those were restrooms that you got to look way back when it was built. It used to be strictly for, there's a well in that building and pumps, and it was mainly for the utility department. And they really kind of built bathrooms for the staff. And I thought, well, gee, as long as we're building bathrooms for staff, they need bathrooms because there was offices, they were there all the time. That let's make them accessible from the outside so the public could use them too. Well, it was never a park building. It was really more, the utility department built it. And it is what it is.
So is that a park building now?
Not really. There's arguments of whose building is it really. The park department never built it, never designed it, had nothing to do with it. The utility department came and just put it in there. And now it needs to be upgraded, and utility is willing to help try to fund some of that.
I was going to suggest that the utility department could pay to fix it.
Well, I lost that argument.
Or we wait until the memorial is funded and then we renovate these.
Mm-hmm. Those are the comments the council is looking to hear. How you feel about these things?
Well, I guess I'll just make summary comments that, in my estimation, having spent the last year looking at our athletic field needs and going through all of it, that this is a very disappointing outcome, and it's a very short-sighted outcome. The fact of the matter is that the athletic fields, where they're placed when we build them, are used citywide. They bring kids in from throughout the city. They're not just a neighborhood piece. We are short on it. Talk to the soccer association, talk to the football association, talk to lacrosse, talk to rugby, you name it. They will all tell you that we do not have the athletic fields that we need. In comparison, not just that we don't, not only do we not have the athletic fields that we need, but in comparison to the other suburbs for which we compete, and we do, for families moving in and out and figuring out where to live. The Tonkas, the Wayzatas, and the EPs, we aren't even in the neighborhood. We aren't even in the ball game relative to the facilities that our neighboring and competing communities have. And in the long run, this is an extremely short-sighted decision in terms of not funding any new fields whatsoever. And I really honestly believe that the City Council should reconsider what's going on here. They can fire me from the Parks Board next year.
I share in your frustration with this plan as it has come to us today. And I think it's a blueprint to see our parks deteriorate. We do not have the money we need to take care of the parks. And so I just, absent a bond referendum, I don't know where the money is going to come to do what we need to do.
I also want to just express again, going through this process, that it's, I think, very frustrating for all of us to come in at the very tail end of it when things appear to largely be decided, and that I think it's something that needs to be looked at for next year in terms of sort of the sequence of the steps where, you know, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I'm not sure that we all feel that we have very much input at this point.
When it is presented to us for review and comment, but the process is done and there's no room for appeal, and you're saying this is what it is, then what review and comment do you make other than we don't like it, we don't agree?
Okay, and I just want to reiterate my frustration with not only the sports fields, and I would like to ask that the City Council gets a copy of the Paragus report from the National Parks, because it does show where we rank as, you know, benchmarked against other communities across the country. And in that, it does show that we are short on fields. And it's one of the few areas that we're actually short on. So that really, we should pay attention to that. But I also want to make a comment that I do think that we can't, if we aren't going to go into a referendum on additional money for the parks, we can't waste time. We need to come up with a plan for revitalizing our neighborhood parks, and that should be part of this 5-year plan. Are there other comments?
I guess, I think in summation, as I listen to everyone here, I'm not sure if there's a person sitting in a chair up here that doesn't think it's probably high time that we take a serious look, along with the council, and we're an advisory board, so I think we can advise the council that it's high time, looking at the CIP and our needs, and they do not match today, they do not match in 5 years, that it is high time that we take a serious look at a bonding referendum situation, and maybe we have a joint meeting and move from there, because this is a prescription to move backwards, not even to maintain, and it's highly unacceptable.
Any other comments? Okay, we will move on to the West Shore Drive Pathway Expansion Proposal on the agenda. This was something new for us, is to comment on transportation. I was actually delighted to see it because it was giving us a chance to comment on a bike trail to a park. And by a park. So I was wondering if someone could give me the background on this and explain the pictures. Maybe, do we want to show the pictures since it's televised?
Okay, these were both in your packet, this being option A. City Engineer Wayne Hool asked the Park Board's review and comment on this proposed plan. This is to bring a bicycle trail through this neighborhood between 66th Street and 64th on the west end of Roslyn Park. And as you can see, this proposed path is more or less a sidewalk, if you will. And you can see the cut sheets on how that gets accomplished. But it's right there next to the street. There is not enough room on the street to have bike lanes like you see on Wooddale. The street is not wide enough. You would have to eliminate parking on both sides of the street, which was not supported. This was Plan A. This is what they brought to, I believe, one of their open houses for the neighborhood input. And what the neighbors preferred actually is option B, which is why it is brought to the Park Board, because instead of just it being a transportation issue, Plan B would essentially widen the existing path on the west side of Roslyn Park, as you see here. So it would not be right next to in the boulevard. It would essentially take the existing asphalt pathway and widen it. So it would be, as you can see here, the cut sheet. Here would be the 8-foot wide Roslyn Park pathway with a 10-foot wide multi-use path for this section of B. In section of C, you'd have a walking path of 8 feet and a bike path here of 10 feet, so they would be separated. Now, as I look at this for the What It's Worth department, and they're just looking for your review and comment on this, the first thing that struck me is, do we really need 18 feet of asphalt for the amount of traffic we get, both pedestrian and bicycles? And especially when you consider the entire length of the proposed, of the approved 9 Mile Creek trail that's going to come through someday, the whole thing is only 10 feet wide, and it's to accommodate both. In my view, this is too wide, too great an impact on nature, on the path, and that would be my comment. But I think it's a wonderful idea to bring and make it more bike-friendly. I just don't like what they're proposing here. I don't think you need to have 18 feet of asphalt on that small section. But anyway, they're looking for your input, probably more so than mine. So.
Do you want to go down the row?
I understand and support what John said.
I think I do too. I was just kind of curious, did the Transportation Commission weigh in on this at all?
Yes, I don't know if it's been brought to them yet.
Okay. I lean more towards the first option. I think whenever you bring pedestrians and bicycles together on the same path, that you have some safety concerns there. And I also agree with that being really wide for a pathway through the woods there too.
What's the current width of the pathway through the woods that they're looking to widen to 18? What is it currently? 8?
Yeah, 18. I'm just thinking the issues regarding runoff and everything else when you put in 18 feet worth of asphalt in the middle, and the impact on wetlands and streams and everything else. It does not seem to be appropriate. So it looks like the option A, as originally proposed, seems to make the most sense, running along the West Shore Drive.
Okay, so first I want to thank the City Council and Transportation Commission for including bike paths And that was one of the things that came out of, what's it called? It was a needs assessment that our community had taken.
Yeah,
in
the attitude and interest survey that we
Right,
did.
it was the one that most people in Edina really were for. It was to improve our bike paths and trails. And getting people from this neighborhood to the north, I think that this would tie into the pedestrian bridge also. There are not that many north-south routes, so I think that I'm really glad to see bike path continue, and this would be a path that could continue on and tie into the 9 Mile Creek Trail. So it would be a way to get north-south traffic. So I am glad that this is on here. It would be, in my mind, I look at it and I think, well, if I were to design it, I would actually put a path next to the walking path and around that lake. And that would be the idea. I think that that would get a whole lot of use. And right now, it's going the way where it hits 64th is kind of a, it seems as if it's going out of the way. If they asked me, I would put it next to the walking path and curve it around and tie it into the pedestrian bridge. And or include, now after all the budgeting, you're going to laugh, but in my dreams, I would love to be able to have a bike path around that lake separated from the walking path. So this is, if you asked me, and they're asking the park board, that's what I would do is make a bike path all the way around the lake. But if it was between option A and option B, I would go with option A because of what you mentioned about the size of the path.
I live in this neighborhood. I run along that path often. It's a no outlet type of situation there. I'm perplexed as to why we would need this whatsoever. I'm all in favor of the bike paths, but the traffic along West Shore Drive, moving that direction towards Crosstown is almost non-existent. There's just a limited number of houses in there. If the road's narrow, somehow I would prefer the bikes to move along that roadway as opposed to spend additional dollars, wreck the, it's a beautiful little area right through there. To me, that might, might detract from the appearance of what we have going on right now. If we do have bikes moving through a separate path, it probably make some sense, because if you look around the Minneapolis lakes, it's hard to mix walking people with their dogs on leashes and bikes and different speeds. That adds some element of danger there. So I don't know. I don't see a whole lot that I like with either of these plans, frankly. So I don't know.
So on the topic of the budgetary concerns, I'm curious as to how this project is being funded, everything from the engineering drawings to the actual path, clearing the brush, all that stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not equipped with that answer.
Because I think there might be things on our list that we put ahead of this path.
Yeah.
I agree about the width. I guess my only comment, I like A because I prefer separation between bikes and people, just like Lake Harriet or Lake Calhoun. Keeping those separate is important.
The environmental impact of Plan B is just too severe, so if I had to support one of the plans, it would be A. But I sort of agree. I don't understand how this fits in with the whole bike system. I would need further study, but that's not what I'm being asked.
Just one other thing I think I forgot to mention. I think Plan A is probably considered a sidewalk. And I don't know, maybe they've already covered this, but according to current ordinance, bicycles are not allowed on sidewalks. So maybe they've already got that part ironed out, or are assuming they will change the ordinance to permit that. There might be, I don't know if anyone wants to send this comment their way, is consider an option C, which is not to have a sidewalk per se, but to make just a 10-foot wide path instead of 18 or 16, and have a 10-foot wide path stretch from 64th to 66th, and make it just one path, similar to what the 9-mile regional trail is going to be. That might be an option. I agree with you, Dan. The amount of traffic it gets is minimal. The only way to get a bike path around the north end of the park, and I agree with Alan, it'd be nice to have bike traffic around. Currently, bikes are not allowed on there because it's just too dangerous. It's not wide enough. We can't get asphalt that wide through the north end. We'd have to end up building a boardwalk, but that's doable. Again, it takes money. But maybe that's the option C might be something you might want to ask them to consider. Well, I don't know how they got around the sidewalk ordinance, but that was some of it.
Is this 2-block stretch tie into the greater Edina bike path in some way to get from certain points in Edina? Because it dead ends up against Crosstown there, I don't see how it can be really part of a master plan of biking around the city, in which case it seems to be a lot of expense and work for a 2-block stretch of bike trail.
Yeah, I don't know if it's for us to debate the wisdom of the transportation master plan, but yeah, you're right. It dumps you into the street. That's what it is. And I don't know what the plan is to do if you're going to have bike traffic on both sides of the street like they did with Wooddale. I don't know. I don't think they're asking the park board to weigh in on that part. Just more, what do you think of using the path to do this?
Is there an option D, do nothing?
Okay, so they just wanted us to discuss this, so. Okay, we've done that. Moving on to 2013 Parks and Rec Department fees and charges.
Thank you. Yeah, this, again, you've done fees and charges for all the enterprise facilities, so I think the most difficult ones are behind you. There aren't a whole lot of changes on our general park and rec fees. We got basically your recreation programs, which we, as staff, try to keep them at a break-even basis. If we don't get enough registrants at those dollar amounts, knowing our expenses, we drop the class. So I think the fees are set at what's fairly affordable and reasonable and covers our expenses. We had a little increase, I see, in men's basketball. The only real significant change, as I pointed out in the staff report, is the increase at Arneson Acres to basically recover some of our expenses. And it is a pretty high demand park. And it also gives preference to residents to increase that non-resident fee a little more than resident.
Can I just ask a simple question? I mean, clearly it's more expensive to provide ice than it is to provide a basketball floor. Why are the fees for basketball twice as high as the fees for hockey?
Well, when you say twice as expensive, are you talking about the hockey rink user $11 per participant?
I'm looking at the four-man leagues. Four-man hockey league, $250. Five-man C or B league basketball, $505.
The hockey is an outdoor program.
Still, I would imagine fairly expensive to apply. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is snowmobile day so expensive?
Showmobile?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's the portable stage we use for the Sousa Band at the 4th of July, and communities once in a great while will rent it. That's pretty rare.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, I was totally confused then.
Yeah, you're not the first one to see it that way, so don't
Okay.
feel embarrassed.
John, can I ask you to comment and give us some general background on how do we differentiate the fees generally speaking, between residents and non-residents? Is there a strategy behind that?
There is. When we feel that the demand for the residents is so great that residents are otherwise going to be denied access to the better times, we'll limit or completely eliminate access for non-residents. When that's not the case, we open the door to non-residents, like we do with the pool, the golf course. But with our general parks, we don't allow any non-residents to reserve any of our athletic fields. Those are what I call sacred, because it's difficult just to keep them in a pristine condition that they need to be for our teams. But, Arneson is one of the few that we allow non-residents to rent. The picnic shelter at Roslyn Park is so heavily used, no non-residents allowed there. So that's kind of the philosophy that we've been using.
I had a question in regards to like full-day rental or hourly rental of parks. Is Roslyn Park requested more than any other park for large like charity events and walks, or are there other parks that see as much demand as Roslyn does? Not just Roslyn, but in and around the lake.
So your question is the...
I'm just curious, does that one see more requests for rental than any of the other parks?
Yeah, the one we get the most requests for is Roslyn Park Pathway, and to run fundraisers.
Yep.
Now, we will only rent those out to residents only.
Okay. And not that I'm trying to find ways to gouge charities, but the one thing that it does do when you have those events, it takes the whole park almost offline for the neighborhood. Is $225 a day and $75 an hour kind of the going rate? What does the city of Minneapolis charge when they do something around like Lake Calhoun?
Yeah, again, that would only be for residents only, is the only ones
Okay.
I rent to. And there's not a lot of demand for that outside of...
Okay, I was just curious.
I guess the only comment I have is looking at the picnic shelter rental cost for half day or full day. They seem pretty low and fairly cheap compared to the city of Minneapolis. Like, for example, looking at Sherwood Park for a half a day, it's $28. A half a day, $28 is really, really cheap. And
Sherwood Park is just a little picnic shelter.
Right,
That's
it's
it.
my
And
backyard.
it's very small. It's
Right,
like
but
two
it's-
picnic tables.
But it's still a picnic shelter. It's like any of those that can host an event for anybody. If you look at the city of Minneapolis for small picnic shelters, it's much higher per hour rates.
How many people does that accommodate?
The Sherwood Park? Or,
No, at Minneapolis.
oh, well, just looking at a variety of different parks. I don't have a particular one
This
in mind,
probably
but-
comfortably accommodates 8 or 10.
a dozen, sure.
Okay, I have one that's kind of vague. I was trying to wrap my mind around these, the fees, and so I went online and looked at the general, through City of Edina, and I looked at the general fund, and because we're only seeing this one piece, which is revenues. We never really see the whole pie. It's very hard for me to just say, oh, well, these look fine, I guess. So I was trying to look at it bigger. And I just had one question, which makes, after all this discussion of budget, and maybe you guys can explain this to me, but it looks as if, and the most recent one is 2011 that's on there, and then the prior year was 2010, but both years it looks as if we have been we have a variance of under budget of 300,000 about for both 2011 and 2010. So I'm just trying to figure out if the
Just show me
city,
what year.
if the city council has budgeted us $3.8 million, but we only used 3.5 million. And that was what happened in 2010 as well. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I see all these needs to keep our parks well-maintained, and I'm, you know, I never have this opportunity to really talk about, are we charging enough for our fees? Well, according to this, maybe we're overcharging, I don't know, or maybe we're just not using the money that's been allocated to us. But I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, what it is that you're showing me is we spent $333,000 less than we were actually budgeted for, which had nothing to do with revenues. Nothing. Okay. I think the bigger question there is, why didn't you spend all the money you were budgeted for? And I think it's a fair question. I think we have to look a little deeper into where are the areas that we actually were very frugal and didn't spend those money. Those are not capital dollars. That's operating dollars.
So what happens to that money then if...
The overages, the council decides at the end of each year, it was well over $1 million last year. And they've decided to put that into funding capital improvements. Okay. Is a big part of it. Now, that we shouldn't be budgeted in a way that you're going to have to be able to count and rely on that. That's not what you'd call a sustainable source of income. But that is, it doesn't matter what you charge in fees. That number all has to do with what kind of expenses we're expecting, what kind of a year did we have as far as a drought, heavy rains, maintenance, vandalism. There's so many factors that can affect that. And a lot of it is we were just darn right frugal. Because of the recession, we were very careful with the dollars and trying to save money through energy savings. And usually we get patted on the back when we spend less.
No,
it's part of the reason, but it has really nothing to do with where the fees are set.
And this year, is it going to be about similar, that we would have 300,000 in our budget?
I would think
that
not.
If otherwise we can talk about a few.
No, don't rely on
few things.
Don't rely on us to be over $250,000 under budget each year.
Okay.
But I will say, in the 19 years I've been your department head, we've never been over budget.
Really?
So.
That's exceptional.
Well, we tend to ask for a little more than we really need, and we're proud to say we're under budget. Mm-hmm. Now, this is getting to a point where, well, we're trying to bring it, closer together, but we've still spent very frugally. We're very careful with your dollars.
Okay. So we'll move on, if everyone's ready, for correspondence and petitions. Any?
Was this just a comment, or were we supposed to vote on one?
No, it's just comment.
Kind of one final comment on this.
Mm-hmm.
What's not really clear to me is how much some of this stuff costs. So some of these things seem very reasonably priced to me. Some of the playground activities and some of the senior center stuff, like, does the city pay for the podiatrist, and does the $2 per patient recoup any or all of that cost? I mean, some of it just seems very cheap, and it's not clear how much is being subsidized by the city, so that would be an additional piece of information that I think would be helpful.
Okay. If I recall correctly, I think the Park Board is going to have a working group to study the senior center specifically in 2013. And your former Park Board member, his name is Bill Lau, wanted to be part of that, and I think you should. Mm-hmm. I think you should put that on your work plan. And if you'd like more information next year for the fees and charges on the expense side, staff is prepared to give that to you if you want to get into that level of looking at, which is fine. That's something you can give us ahead of time, and we can work toward that. Easy for the 6-week employee to sit here and say that, but...
They just love us micromanaging.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
So, are there any other board comments? Okay, staff comments?
Yeah, we just have a couple things. Well, I already gave you the word that we unfortunately did not get the Garden Park baseball grant for $282,660. That doesn't mean we're not going to at least go forward and still try to use the $100,000 that's budgeted for it and match that with baseball's 100 grant. I think a lot of field improvement could be done with that, and I think that'd be wise. And I think it also then opens the door to apply for the grant this next cycle too, because now you know that the council is hopefully will stay committed to that 100 grand and consider a three-way match. I think you'd be positioned for a much better chance of landing some dollars through the Hennepin Youth Sports Program. I'm told that the Walnut Ridge Park lights that you acted on, they raised the money, the lights are up, they're going on three sides of the building and a tree, and at the end of that, the contractor will take them down. And so hats off to the neighborhood that raised the money. And you were going to speak to the sports dome and how it relates to some field bartering that's going on out there.
Just wanted to give an update on the sports dome. I will be making your recommendation to the city council tomorrow night. And as I was talking to some members prior to the meeting, they wanted a refreshment on exactly what that recommendation was. And it is the continued study of Braemar and the forward motion of the dome should not occur until the issue of expanded playing fields is addressed, solved, and budgeted for. Along those lines, I've been working with the Edina Football Association, lacrosse, and soccer club on trying to figure out ways that we can reallocate field space to try to make the Braemar field an option for a dome. And we've come up with what we feel might be a very good temporary field solution, and that is moving football in the fall to the new artificial turf at Braemar if we were to build a dome, and then moving soccer to the Lewis Park fields where the football is currently using. That would give soccer extra field space. In fact, in the fall, soccer isn't getting any field space from park fields, and it would give football a turf field that they're looking for. It would give soccer the ability to possibly run two fields widthwise on the very westerly Lewis field. And it appears to be a win-win for all of the associations involved. The soccer club is very interested and very excited about this proposal, and football and lacrosse are very interested as well. This would also give us possibly the ability to take the rested field and put it back into play at Lewis. The primary reason for resting a field at Lewis right now is because the football use on that field really tears up the fields that they're using. So if football is off those fields and onto an artificial turf field, we would be able to put that field back into play for soccer. So right now, all of the associations involved are very, very interested and excited about this proposal. So it at least gives us a temporary solution to the loss of field space if we turf the Braemar athletic field.
Are they signing off?
They would.
They will?
They will.
Show me.
They have not. We've really been working on this in the last couple of weeks, and they haven't had an opportunity to meet with their boards to give us an official letter. So this isn't a firm, written deal, but I have received a verbal assurance from the associations involved, especially soccer.
Well, thank you for all that. What sounds like hard work and negotiating to salvage something and make it work for everyone. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Is there an update on the golf dome?
Yes, we've hired Brian Recker from RJM to be kind of the construction manager, I guess would be his title, putting together what it's going to cost us to replace it to what we want it to be. It'll be a building separated from the dome and not attached to it, so it's not pulling on the roof, and to do it right, versus what is the insurance company willing to pay us? So he had to put up two separate budgets. To now we're going to the insurance company to say, we feel that you should settle for this. And we just submitted that, and he just submitted that to the insurance company today, as a matter of fact. So it's going to be a few days for them to go over that data. We're getting close to a settlement. I think it's pretty clear that we're not going to get as much money as we need to replace what we really need. There's a lot of extra code requirements, which we are bound to have to do. The good news is the insurance company will pay for that up to a limit, and it's already over that limit. So we're going to be several $100,000 above what it's going to cost, what we'll get from the insurance company. But we may end up having to go after the folks that have found to be guilty of causing the fire. I don't know. That might be another source of trying to capture some of that.
I didn't realize we knew that who caused the fire.
I think there's some subrogation is determining that there is a guilty party. I shouldn't sit here and say that because I don't know that for fact, but that would be a strategy to capture some of our additional losses because of that. So that's something that we're going to look into, I should say. Okay. So unfortunately, whether it's going to be up and ready by March is probably unlikely, but to be determined how quickly we can hear from insurance, how quickly we can get moving on these things. So when you're dealing with insurance companies and whatnot, the process is slower than just putting together a hornet's nest.
Well, and speaking of hornet's nest, I was just there today, and that West Arena looks fabulous, and it looks as if the ice is all set. Can you fill us in on that as well?
Sure, I'm going to let Ann speak some more tonight. We've both been over there touring it, and it's exciting.
We did have a major mechanical failure on the West Arena, and we're still trying to determine the exact cause of that failure. But we did have a corrosive environment in one of our chillers that caused the solution to actually rust through some of our tubes in the chiller. We were able to isolate and repair those tubes on the chiller, and we did get the ice back up and operational in time to get the hockey season off to a good start. So as I mentioned, we're still trying to get to the bottom of exactly the cause of the chemical imbalance that we had. But we are back up and running. Unfortunately, it took over a week to make the repair and then another week to put the ice back in.
But we're 2 weeks over, past our date we were hoping to open. So now we're shooting for the 15th of December for at least a good half of it.
Yep. For the locker rooms of the Hornet's Nest, we should be open by December 15th.
And a little bit longer for the retail. Run into some delays or problems that we won't bore you with, but very exciting project. Very exciting. I think it's going to be very successful when it's all built and done. Very exciting.
Are there any other questions of staff or comments? Okay, is there a motion to...
We got the minutes for the Veterans Memorial for June. How's it going?
Well, unfortunately, in my absence, recovering from surgery, not much happened. But since then, since I've been back, we've got someone to take over the fundraising effort. I talked someone into doing that. So it's back on track. If you look on our website, you'll see some new things on the Veterans Memorial. There's now a thermometer that shows you how much money they've raised. We're about $130,000 out of $450 that needs to be raised, and I think they're gonna get there. I think what we found, and I should just volunteer this, no one from the committee really stepped up to do the fundraising, is what happened. So I thought, well, I'm passionate about it enough, I'll do it. So the chair and I went out and sat out and made all these presentations. I don't think that served the committee well, being a staff person. They feel, well, the city, you got all the money, you got pockets of it. So that wasn't, as it turns out, not a good thing. We raised 120-some thousand or more, but I think at the end of the day, they'll be better served to have someone who does this for a living and is not a staff person. So I think it's on the right track. I'm very optimistic about it, and I want to see it get done. So I think it's going to happen.
I just want to think we ought to recognize that Coach Bolton and the EHS had a heck of a football season, and EFA built some pretty good players through the program and using our fields. And they beat EP on homecoming. So I think it's worth recognizing the work that's done and the fact that EFA and our fields, those kids played on.
They also beat Hopkins and Wayzata on their homecomings.
Oh, I didn't know they were both.
Boy, where do we stop? The girls' tennis team set a national record, 16 state championships in a row.
Motion to adjourn. Sports is like a cult. I mean,
Yep.
Good.